When you hear the words E. coli, you probably think of, I don't know, a panicked lettuce recall at the grocery store.
Right, or maybe like an undercooked hamburger making the evening news.
Exactly. It just sounds like this completely foreign invader. But the truth is, this bacteria is already living inside you right now.
Yeah, it's a totally normal and actually essential part of your intestinal ecosystem. It literally helps keep your gut healthy.
Which brings us to the core question for us today. How does a friendly microscopic tenant suddenly turn into a life-threatening pathogen?
It is honestly one of the most fascinating biological contradictions we face. I mean, we carry this organism we absolutely needed to digest our food, but under the wrong evolutionary circumstances, it becomes incredibly destructive.
And the mission of this deep dive is to map that dual life of Escherichia coli. We're going to explore its biology, understand how these highly specialized strains cause massive outbreaks, and decode terrifying medical paradox.
Right, the paradox where the standard medical treatments we usually rely on can actually make an infection much, much worse.
Yeah, that part is wild. So for you listening, we're pulling from a synthesis of some really vital sources today. We have global health data from the World Health Organization, a recent April 2026 CDC outbreak alert, and clinical literature from StatPearls.
So to solve the mystery of why our own gut bacteria can make us sick, I mean, we have to look at how it builds its defenses.
Okay, let's unpack this. The clinical data categorizes E. coli as a gram-negative bacillus.
Yeah, which sounds complicated, but bacillus basically just means it's shaped like a little rod.
Right, but the gram-negative part, that seems to be the crucial detail for why this thing is so hard to fight, right? Like, what does that actually mean for the bacteria's armor?
It's all about the cell envelope. A gram-negative bacteria essentially wears a microscopic hazmat suit.
Hazmat suit.
Yeah, it doesn't just have a standard cell wall. It has an inner membrane, a thin cell wall, and then this additional highly complex outer membrane.
Wow, okay.
And that outer layer is packed with something called lipopolysaccharide. So this is a lipid of fat that is highly toxic to humans, but, only if the bacterial cell is broken open.
Oh, I see. So as long as the bacteria is intact, it's just armor.
Exactly. It's just protecting the cell.
So scientists categorize these bacteria by looking at the specific customized pieces of that armor, right? The literature talks about the O and H antigens.
Right.
And the O antigen is basically a repeating chain on that outer membrane, while the H antigen is the flagellum, the little whip-like tail it uses to swim.
Yeah, so if you think of the outer membrane chain as the bacteria's uniform, the flagellum is its engine.
A uniform and an engine. I like that.
And the specific combination of that uniform and engine tells a lab exactly what kind of threat they're dealing with.
Like the famous E. coli O157-H7.
Precisely. That is a specific uniform and a specific engine. Over millions of years, the different strains of E. coli have essentially acquired new weapons, right?
Yeah, creating what the sources call the 5 main pathotypes. It's basically an evolutionary rogues gallery of E. coli that cause severe intestinal illness.
Let's look at how these different variants attack, because the mechanics are, frankly, wild. Take E-tech, or enterotoxigenic E. coli.
That's the classic culprit behind traveler's diarrhea, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it uses these tiny hair-like grappling hooks called fimbriae to anchor itself to your intestinal wall.
Ouch.
Yeah, and then it pumps out toxins that basically hijack the cells in your gut. It forces them to secrete massive amounts of chloride while blocking them from absorbing sodium.
And water naturally follows those electrolytes, right? So it just floods the intestinal tract.
Exactly. It's a chemical hijack. It turns the human gut into a water pump, which results in severe watery diarrhea.
But the catch with E-tech is the sheer volume required. I mean, the data says to get sick from this strain, you generally have to ingest around 100 million organisms.
100 million. Yeah, it requires highly contaminated food or water, which is why it's mostly an issue in regions lacking adequate sanitation.
Right. But then you look at another variant, EPEC, enteropathogenic E. coli, which primarily targets infants. And this one doesn't just attach, it performs like microscopic surgery.
The mechanism here is incredible to think about. EPEC uses what they call a bundle-forming pilus to latch onto the cells lining the small intestine.
Okay.
And once it's locked on, it deploys a structure called a type 3 injectosome.
Which is literally just a microscopic hypodermic needle.
It acts exactly like a syringe. The bacteria pierces the human enterocyte cell and injects about 20 different toxic proteins directly inside.
Wait, really? 20 different proteins?
Yeah, and these proteins hijack the human cell's internal skeleton. They destroy the microvilli, which are the tiny fingers on the cell surface that absorb nutrients and water,
So the bacteria literally wipes out the absorptive surface area of the gut.
completely. And if that isn't strange enough, you have EAEC, the enteroaggregative strain.
Oh yeah, the clinical description for that one is that it adheres to the gut in a stack brick pattern.
Right, it builds a literal biofilm fortress on the intestinal wall, just clumping together like bricks to release toxins.
Or EIEC, the enteroinvasive strain. That one operates more like a home invader. It actually breaches the colonic cells, hiding inside them and spreading from cell to cell to evade the immune system.
Yeah, those four are serious, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they really pale in comparison to the fifth type, the deadliest variant.
EAC, enterohemorrhagic E. coli, which is more commonly referred to as STEC, Shiga toxin-producing E. coli.
STEC is the one that makes the evening news. And the contrast here is staggering.
Yeah, because we just established that E-Tech needs you to swallow 100 million organisms to get sick. But SEC requires an extraordinarily low inoculum.
Just 100 organisms.
Wait, 100 million versus just 100, so it's not a numbers game at all.
Not even a little bit.
If E-Tech is this massive invading army storming the gates of your immune system, S-Tech is more like, I don't know, a highly specialized special ops strike team.
A strike team is a perfect way to conceptualize it. It only needs 100 microscopic operatives to cause total systemic chaos in the human body.
Wow.
And that extreme efficiency changes the entire dynamic of how it spreads. I mean, it doesn't need a heavily polluted water source.
Right, it can just move seamlessly from a slightly contaminated surface to a hand to a mouth or directly from person to person.
Which explains exactly why it is such a massive threat to our food supply.
Exactly. If a strike team that tiny is all it takes, what happens when it gets into the environment before we can stop it? Because global health data shows this pathogen is incredibly durable.
It really is. STEC can survive and multiply in temperatures ranging from a chilly 7 degrees all the way up to 50 degrees Celsius.
That's a huge range.
And it can survive in acidic environments down to a pH of 4.4, which means acidic foods won't even kill it. It thrives in low water environments too.
So the biological reality is that the only reliable way to destroy it is thermal destruction, like thoroughly cooking food until all parts reach at least 70 degrees Celsius.
Let's ground this in reality with that CDC multi-state outbreak alert from April 2026.
Right. This investigation linked a severe STEC outbreak to Raw Farm LLC, specifically their raw cheddar cheese and raw milk.
There were 9 confirmed cases across 3 states. 3 people were hospitalized.
And the most sobering detail in that report is that over half of these severe illnesses were in children under the age of 5.
Yeah. The reason it is so devastating, especially to children, comes down to the specific weapons this strike team carries. Shiga toxins, known as STS1 and STX2.
Okay, so once S-Tech enters the gut, it starts producing these toxins.
Right, and they're designed to do one thing: inhibit protein synthesis in the host cells.
It essentially shuts down the internal factories of the human cells.
Exactly. And when those cellular factories shut down, the enterocyte cells die en masse.
Which triggers massive inflammation, right?
Yes, inflammation and the destruction of the blood vessels in the gut lining. This results in hemorrhagic colitis, which is severe bloody diarrhea.
And children under 5 are disproportionately affected because their immune and renal systems simply do not have the capacity to handle that level of cellular destruction.
Precisely.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting. We are seeing this huge modern wellness trend where people actively seek out raw, unpasteurized milk and cheeses.
Yeah, operating under the belief that it's more natural.
Right. But when you look at the biology, doesn't this outbreak prove that natural just means we've stripped away the very defense mechanisms that protect vulnerable populations?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the ecological reservoir of this bacteria.
Okay.
Global health monitoring shows that cattle are the primary reservoir for E. coli 0157.H7, which is the most notorious S-Tech strain.
But the cows don't get sick from it.
No. This bacteria lives quite happily and completely harmlessly in the hindgut of healthy cows.
Because cows don't have the specific biological receptors for the Shiga toxin, right?
Exactly. To the cow, it's just part of its normal flora. But because it's in the gut, the cow is constantly shedding the bacteria in its manure.
And in any dairy operation, I mean, no matter how clean it is, manure is present in the environment where milking happens.
Right. And pasteurization is not about adding artificial chemicals to milk. It is simply the application of 70 degrees Celsius of heat.
The thermal destruction we mentioned earlier.
Yes. That heat is the only barrier separating the microscopic traces of cow feces from a human being.
So when you bypass pasteurization, you are basically giving that 100 operative sex strike team a direct, unhindered route into a child's body.
That's exactly what's happening biologically.
So let's play this out. The strike team gets in. A child or an adult gets sick. They develop the severe cramps, the bloody diarrhea. As a parent or a patient, your immediate reflex is going to be, give me medicine, fix this.
Naturally.
But treating STEC reveals a terrifying medical paradox. It is a situation where applying standard medical logic can actually be fatal.
This is why clinical diagnosis is so incredibly urgent. Up to 10% of patients who contract a STEC infection go on to develop a systemic, life-threatening complication called hemolytic uremic syndrome, or HUS.
And the clinical literature describes HUS as this classic devastating triad. Like, three things happen at once.
Right.
First, acute renal failure, meaning your kidneys suddenly stop filtering waste and shut down. Second, hemolytic anemia, where your red blood cells are literally being shredded and destroyed as they circulate.
Yeah.
And third, thrombocytopenia, which is a dangerously low blood platelet count.
The physiological cascade here is brutal. The Shiga toxins enter the bloodstream and bind to specific receptors that are highly concentrated in the human kidney.
Okay.
The toxins damage the tiny blood vessels in the kidneys, causing microclots to form.
Oh, wow.
So as your red blood cells try to squeeze past these clots that get sliced apart, that's the anemia, your body uses up all its platelets trying to fix these endless microscopic clots. That's the thrombocytopenia.
And because the filtering units are clogged with clots and dead cells, the kidneys just fail.
Exactly. HUS has a 3 to 5% fatality rate, and it is the most common cause of acute renal failure in young children. Even among the children who survived, 50% are left with permanent, chronic kidney damage.
Which brings us to the paradox. I mean, if I or my kid gets a severe bacterial infection causing terrible diarrhea, standard logic says you attack the bacteria with antibiotics or you take an over-the-counter anti-diarrheal like loperamide to stop the symptoms.
But clinical guidelines explicitly state that these medications are heavily contraindicated for STEC. Giving them actually increases the risk of the patient developing HUS.
Wait, fighting the bacteria with antibiotics makes the infection more lethal? How does that even work? Are you saying fighting back is the worst thing you can do?
It comes back to the biological structure of the bacteria we discussed at the very beginning. Remember the gram-negative armor?
The microscopic hazmat suit with the toxic lipids?
Right. If you introduce a standard antibiotic, its job is to attack, and lysis meaning burst open the bacterial cell wall to kill it.
Oh, so if the bacteria is the nest and the Shiga toxins are the hornets, bursting the cell wall to kill the bacteria is essentially just blowing up the hornet's nest inside the body.
That is exactly what happens. You destroy the cell wall, and in doing so, you release a massive concentrated payload of Shiga toxins all at once directly into the gut.
And from there, it's rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream and heads straight for the kidneys.
Furthermore, some antibiotics actually trigger a stress response in the E. coli, causing it to rapidly accelerate its production of Shiga toxins right before it dies.
A biological dead man switch. That is absolutely horrifying.
It is.
And what about the anti-diarrheal medications? Why are those dangerous?
Well, anti-motility drugs work by paralyzing the muscles of the gut to stop the physical action of diarrhea. But diarrhea is a mechanical immune response.
It's your body's desperate attempt to physically flush the pathogen out.
Exactly. If you paralyze the gut, you trap all those released Shiga toxins inside the body. They just sit there, giving them much more time to be absorbed into the bloodstream.
Which, again, drastically increases the likelihood of kidney failure. So what do doctors actually do? If you can't kill it and you can't stop the symptoms, what is the treatment?
The treatment for STEC is strictly supportive care. You basically have to ride it out while supporting the organs.
So just IV fluids?
Primarily, yes. Aggressive intravenous fluids to keep the kidneys continuously flushed and hydrated, helping them survive the toxin assault.
Wow.
And doctors must strictly avoid giving NS, like ibuprofen, for the pain, because those drugs restrict blood flow to the kidneys, which would further compromise their function.
We should clarify, though, if someone travels abroad and gets ETEC, the traveler's diarrhea we talked about earlier, a doctor might actually prescribe an antibiotic like rifaximin, right?
Yeah.
Because the danger of the exploding hornet's nest is specifically linked to the Shiga toxins in the STEC strain.
That is a vital distinction. Medical intervention depends entirely on correctly identifying whether the bacteria is producing Shiga toxins.
This is why rapid molecular PCR stool testing is mandatory before administering any drugs for severe bloody diarrhea. You have to know which uniform and engine you're fighting.
Exactly. But, we've spent this entire discussion focused on the gut. The clinical data reveals that E. coli has a completely different, equally dangerous life when it gets lost.
When it takes a wrong turn inside the human body.
We call these extraintestinal infections. When E. coli translocates, meaning it escapes the gastrointestinal tract, it becomes the single most predominant gram-negative bacteria causing illness outside the gut in humans.
Yeah, the numbers from the clinical literature are massive. I mean, between 2009 and 2016, there were nearly 72,000 extraintestinal E. coli infections identified just in U.S. hospitals.
And a staggering 66% of those were urinary tract infections.
UTIs.
Yeah, UTIs typically occur when the commensal E. coli, the normal, friendly bacteria living around the gut area, ascends the urethra.
It's a massive driver of ambulatory care visits.
But also invades the respiratory system, acting as a major cause of ventilator-associated pneumonia in hospitalized patients, often from the microaspiration of stomach contents into the lungs.
And it can also cause spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, which is a severe infection of the abdominal cavity.
Right.
But wait, if it's evolved specifically to live in the gut, how does it survive in the urinary tract or the lungs? Those are completely different, highly hostile environments.
It's amazing, really.
It's like a weed. It's totally helpful when it stays in the compost bin of the gut, breaking things down. But if a seed blows into the delicate flower beds of the urinary tract, it just takes over. How does it hold on?
It comes down to remarkable evolutionary adaptability. The E. coli that cause UTIs have developed specific variations of those grappling hooks we mentioned earlier.
The fimbriae.
Yes, they possess specialized fimbriae that are uniquely designed to bind to the specific cells lining the human urinary tract. This allows them to anchor themselves firmly against the sheer physical force of urine trying to wash them away.
But wait, we just established that for STEC in the gut, using antibiotics is a terrible idea. But for these extraintestinal infections in the urinary tract or lungs, the medical literature says you absolutely have to use antibiotics to save the patient.
You do.
Except, aren't we running out of ammunition because of antibiotic resistance?
We are locked in a severe evolutionary arms race. Because E. coli is so ubiquitous in humans and animals, it is exposed to antibiotics constantly, and it is rapidly developing heavy resistance.
Yeah, we are seeing a terrifying rise in ESBL-producing strains.
Exactly.
ESBL. What does that actually mean for the bacteria's defense?
It stands for extended spectrum beta-lactamase. Essentially, the bacteria has evolved to produce a specialized enzyme that actively seeks out common antibiotics like cephalosporins and literally breaks their chemical structure apart.
Rendering the drug completely useless.
Yep, it's actively disarming our weapons.
Then it gets worse than ESBLs.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Much worse. We are now encountering carbapenemase-producing strains. Carbapenems are some of our strongest, broad-spectrum, hospital-grade intravenous antibiotics.
Right, like our safety net.
But these new strains produce enzymes that destroy those too. When doctors encounter these superbugs, they have to rely on local antibiograms.
Which are basically localized, real-time maps of antibiotic resistance patterns in a specific hospital or city, right? Just to guess what might still work.
And if the standard and heavy-duty drugs fail, you're forced into a corner.
Right.
It often requires resorting to last-line, highly toxic antibiotics like colistin or polymyxin B, and those carry their own severe risks of kidney damage and neurological side effects.
The stakes are incredibly high once E. coli leaves the gut and enters a sterile environment.
This is why prevention in healthcare settings is paramount. Protocols like strictly reducing the use of indwelling medical devices, such as urinary catheters, are the most effective ways to prevent these opportunistic weeds from ever taking root in the first place.
Okay, let's bring this all together. We have journeyed from the microscopic lipid armor of E. coli through the surgical strikes of the intestinal pathotypes into the incredibly dangerous paradox of treating STEC, and finally to the superbug battlegrounds of the urinary tract.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. When you look at the totality of these sources, what is the core biological advice you should walk away with?
From a practical standpoint, it aligns perfectly with the World Health Organization's 5 keys to safer food.
Okay.
Keep clean, separate raw and cooked foods. Cook thoroughly to that thermal barrier of 70 degrees Celsius. Keep food at safe temperatures and use safe water.
And as the CDC outbreak clearly highlighted, we really have to protect the most vulnerable immune systems. Children under 5 should avoid raw dairy and undercooked meat.
Because their kidneys simply do not have the resilience to survive a Shiga toxin strike team.
Exactly. And if someone does develop severe bloody diarrhea, remember the paradox. Do not reflexively reach for antibiotics or antidiarrheals until a doctor has confirmed the exact strain.
I want to leave you with a lingering biological reality from the global health data that underscores the sheer resilience of this organism.
What's that?
Steak isn't just a food contaminant. It is deeply embedded in our environment. It can survive for months in manure and in the sediment of animal water troughs.
Wow, months.
Furthermore, humans themselves can act as asymptomatic carriers. A person can show zero clinical signs of illness, yet shed these tech bacteria in their feces for weeks.
So they're completely capable of infecting others without ever knowing they're carrying a pathogen.
Exactly.
Think about that next time you visit a petting zoo, swim in a local pond, or shake hands at a farm. We share our world and our water with a microscopic ecosystem that is infinitely more adaptable and far more resilient than we are.
Absolutely.
And that friendly microscopic tenant helping you digest your food right now, it demands a healthy level of respect. Until next time, keep questioning and stay curious.